the truth is that if the whole of Europe, gets everything right, okay, meet all their targets, everything is done, well done, right? But if India doesn't, let's say, you still end up nowhere.
What are your thoughts on the current narrative around climate change? Are we thinking about it correctly?
Uh, well, I think parts of it's not a black and white thing. So there are parts of it which are good, parts of it where may not be, maybe things can be done better. I personally believe that um, this whole idea that climate change is being fueled by consumerism, which is true in the sense that we are consuming a lot more than earlier, but uh, I often have this problem with this definition of saying that, hey, what is your personal carbon footprint? And I believe that that is where I sometimes do not agree with the overall narrative, because I don't think it's a personal decision making that is leading to climate change. I think it is a overall ecosystem that has been developed where we are not making things that would last longer than earlier. So consumerism is not being driven by individuals; it is being driven from the top down. And I think that is what, to tell, hey, Ayush, can you do this and reduce your carbon footprint? I don't think it makes much sense. If I don't want you to use plastic as a country, for example, ban the plastics. Don't let Ayush have an option of using plastics. And then Ayush will go back to maybe what his grandparents used to do, is use maybe cloth bags, and that used to work really well for their generation. I see no reason why it won't work for us. So I think that is one part of the narrative which I don't like much, but otherwise I think there is a lot of progress has been made over the last few years, and a lot of seriousness has come into the climate change narrative, and not just narrative, but how people are consuming it as corporates and governments. They are far more serious than they were earlier. Yeah.
Mhm. What's a carbon footprint? Can you just quickly define that so we know exactly what we're talking about?
So, for example, everything that you do,
Mhm.
it has been made by, using some form of energy, right? And when you release that energy, there is a footprint, which is how much CO2 has been released in the environment for making that one particular product. So, for example, in morning, you got up, you brush your teeth, even that toothbrush, the plastic, it comes from some fossil fuel has been burned to make it. You take anything, even when you have, let's say, hey, I'm using solar energy, but the solar energy also has a carbon footprint because you are using a solar panel, which has a footprint. You have a distribution of energy, right? You have a grid, which is bringing that energy to you. Everything has a footprint. The question is, so therefore, when you calculate on a daily basis what you're consuming, you can convert that consumption into an carbon, how much CO2 has been emitted to make that product for you. And that is what your personal carbon footprint is.
Hmm.
You
I
expand
see.
that definition to corporates, governments, countries, you get your overall carbon, emissions as a country, as a society, as a company at all. Yeah.
Sure. And in terms of this increasing global carbon footprint, what happens, I guess we're just abstracting now, but what happens if we don't solve climate change? Are there any instant signs that we can look for now? Or what are your thoughts around what happens if we just fail to solve this changing climate situation?
Well, some of the early signs are there, which I think IPCC just released the latest reports, I think 2 days back, and whatever the signs are not great.
Yeah,
The whole, at least the picture right now is pretty grim. So the question is, if your question is, what happens if we do nothing? Uh, if we really, zoom out and say, if you're looking in the timelines of universe, nothing happens, right?
sure.
You we have had mass extinctions happening multiple times in the history of Earth. So it's not that it is happening for the first time. This time we are the cause mostly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
a lot of people, a lot of climate deniers will say, hey, you are not cause, it is just natural cycles. And whatever you are doing also is natural, in a way that, extinctions are bound to happen. Earth is going to continue evolving, just like it has evolved for so many millions of years. So we can take a view that, hey, I don't want to do anything about this. Let it happen. Let everything go down to the drain. That's fine. Um, the question is, what if we do something about it? And that gives you maybe a better chance of living a better life for yourself, for your next generation, and the generation after that. If you don't, definitely if seawater level rises, there will be cities that might get, wiped out. There will be a lot of those things. We're already seeing weather, becoming a lot unpredictable compared to past. But again, humans we have a sense of data, some limited data we have modeling for what used to happen millions of years ago. There is always a possibility something may happen, naturally, which may, mitigate this situation on its own. But I don't think that's how you do risk management. You don't just leave things out for somebody else to naturally solve.
Mhm.
If you know you are, over speeding, the best way to, solve the problem is to reduce the speed, not to wait for other people to maybe manage around your, reckless driving. So I think that's how I see it, that if you don't do something, maybe there is some random chance that nothing may happen. But the good chances of what we are seeing right now, the early signs are that things are going to go much worse for human beings and for a lot of other species.
So submerged cities, climate refugees, the soils could be
Right.
not fertile enough, so we lose food crops and all of that. So I guess just taking a step back, what is your background and how did you find yourself in this climate tech sector?
Well, my background is finance, and I pretty much accidentally entered into this space. When we started off as Graviky Lab, we were working primarily in a very open space. We were not defining as to what we want to build and what we want to bring to the market. Uh, Over a period of time, things happened in a way that we slowly, narrowed down our scope and became part of, a huge community that is trying to solve different climate change problems. But yeah, I come from purely finance background and zero tech background. Haven't studied science at all since high school. So yeah, still learning my ways into a space that is significantly the future and direction of this space is going to be science driven and very
Mhm.
what we call deep science driven. So yeah, still learning my ways into that.
And what does Graviky do, the company you're with, and how does it help solve this climate change issue?
uh, as I said, we didn't start with the idea of working in climate change. We had a lot of ideas. One of the ideas was that you can upcycle carbon into materials for everyday use.
Mhm.
So we started working on a part of the climate, the carbon problem that is called, PM 2.5, that is the particulate emissions that come out of burning of fossil fuels. And can we use those instead of looking them as a pollution? Can we look at them as a resource and put them to some use? So what we are doing at Graviky is we are taking those particulate emissions and converting them into uh, pigments that can be then used as a replacement for carbon black. Currently, our focus is the inks and paint industry. So we make these inks that can be used to make your printing more sustainable. And we have demonstrated a lot of use cases for that with different industry partners. And but beyond that, we continue to do a lot more research in how we can do a lot more with carbon. Where our focus, so there is within the framework of how you can reduce how you can address climate change. There are different ways to do that. One is, for example, we do carbon capture and storage, which companies like Climeworks are doing. And then there is that can you do carbon capture and upcycling, which is our focus. And then there is, reduction of consumption. Then there is, developing what you call ways to adjust to the climate change in the sense which is not about changing how we do things, but changing how we will acclimatize to different weather conditions and everything in future. But our focus is purely on the carbon capture and upcycling. And in this space, as I said, we are focused on inks and paints. And in that, we have done a lot of applications for, in liquor space, in packaging space, in apparel, packaging and apparel being our two focus areas. And the interesting thing is that something which we learned, when we're all deep into this game and we didn't start with that logic, is that when we look at all the colors around us, black is one of the most difficult color to make sustainable. So, all the natural colors they we get a lot of different colors, but getting a black color, making it sustainable is a big challenge. And that's where we see, our USP, that we are being able to replace carbon black in a black color, which gives us a significant benefit of reducing, dependence on fossil fuels. So it's not just that we are reducing the particulate emissions, but we are also replacing the fossil fuel, consumption of fossil fuel while making these instant paints, which really helps our customer to, get away from conventional inks and use a more sustainable product.
So this entire climate tech industry is relatively new. I would say that maybe it's a couple
Yes,
decades old at most,
yes,
maybe even newer
yes.
than that. So from when you started in it, how has the industry changed? What kind of shifts and maybe some cracks developed? And how is the overall developed as you've been in it?
I think a lot has changed. See, yes, you're right that industry is relatively new in the sense that there were not many startups in the space 10 years ago. Uh, but the changes have happened because of the whole ecosystem, not just because of, for example, the business side of it. So, Paris Accord brought in the NDCs where nationally governments were making commitments as to when they intend to hit net zero. That has fueled a lot of seriousness among large polluters to take up adopt carbon solution or carbon reduction solutions and use them on their at a larger scale. So what we are seeing over the last 5-6 years since we started operating is the whole ESG and or the climate change solution. It's people are not looking at sustainability as a tick in the box, which earlier used to be there. Everybody was just happy to do something about it and play it up in their marketing and PR space. Right now, it is said no company can really afford not to have a chief sustainability officer, and that's a great change that has happened over the last 5 years, where now people are much more serious about how they are going to become sustainable as a business or as a as any group or any country. And along with that, we are seeing that the greenwashing is no more that easily acceptable. Last year, actually, there were a lot of articles on this issue that now businesses are, even when they're doing a lot of good work, they're not talking as much about that because they want to make sure that what they're doing really works instead of just playing the PR on it. So I think that is these 2-3 changes in terms of how governments are making their national commitments known with a given, with a defined time frame, to corporates becoming much more serious about their how they go about sustainability, what sort of solutions they accept and adopt and scale. I think that has changed, and that we can see that in even our conversations with brands. We see them a lot more clear in terms. Clarity is seriously out there as to what they want to achieve, and that makes things easier for companies like us because we know whether we fit into their, whosoever we are talking to, whether we really fit into their their matrix for achieving sustainability. Gives us a clear insights into what is going to happen on the business side in the next few years. And building for that becomes easier then. Earlier, it used to be that you build and try to push. Now you're seeing market telling you in much more clear terms as to what they need from us.
So we talked about the past, the past of the industry where people weren't really taking climate change seriously, and now people have started developing their businesses to be more sustainable. They started taking the entire issue more seriously because we can see the effects right now. So, what does the future of the climate tech industry look like for you and also in general?
Well, I think for me in general is same. It's a I think it is going to be the industry to work in for next few years. You're going to see significant growth in terms of number of solutions coming in, number of people joining in, different, the scale at which most of us are operating are still very small. So you're going to see the scaling up of these solutions happening over next few years. And a lot of new things to happen. There's a lot more tech development that needs to be done to hit the net zero and forget going to negative. So the net zero itself require a lot of R&D. We see a lot more support coming from the academic ecosystem on that. So a lot of those things are, I think, gonna change. But I think the biggest change that is going to happen is not as the climate tech industry, but I see the biggest change is going to be that you are not going to be a climate tech expert. I think every job description will somewhere down the line will require you to have climate as one of the key parameters as to what you do and how you do it. So it's not going to be, hey, these are few people in our office who are sustainability guys or climate tech guys. Everything else, everybody else is just doing the things the way they were done 20 years back. I don't think that's gonna float anymore. You're gonna see a lot more. You're gonna see, as you know, how you would define what is your turnaround time if you are in service industry. You're
Right.
going to see that when people are defining their jobs, defining the products they are building, sustainability will get built into that thing as a foundation, not as I said, I've taken the box later on. So it won't be somebody joining a conversation down the line.
Mm-hmm.
I think from the day one, the conversation will require sustainability to be built into everything that you do, every process, every product, every individual. So I hope actually, though I
Right.
see that happen anyways in future, but I hope that happens earlier the better, because that makes your life so much easier as a if you're addressing this problem. If you go about saying let it happen, then it's another thing. But I think that is going to be the biggest change, that there won't be climate tech experts. Every job will be a climate tech job in future.
That's fascinating. So on one hand, you're saying that, climate understandings, let's say, will go the way of coding, where it becomes a kind of necessity for jobs rather than a nice to have skill. And on the
I
other
hope so.
hand, you're saying that in the past, climate or sustainability rather, thinking about the climate was a top-down phenomenon where people just said, how do we adapt our things um, to solve climate change? But now businesses are starting to use a bottom-up approach and build themselves around sustainability.
Two different things actually. They're same in
Mhm.
a way, but two different. Again, I would say that as a business, see, I, what is the capital when you're deploying capital, what return that capital wants, in what sort of framework, money can you can make money in different ways, right? So to say that I'm going to make money making sure that my product is good for the nature, for the good for human race and other animals and the plants, that's one thing. That decision as an individual I can't take, right? As the lowest rung employee, I'm not going to take that decision. So those decisions is what the top down approach has to solve. The
Right.
bottom approach is that I cannot be oblivious to the fact that, hey, if I want to build if I'm the logistics guy and I want my company's products to be sustainable, I cannot be, you know, oblivious to that logistics play a significant role in that. So it's not that somebody will come and tell me, hey, do this logistics this way. I have to make sure the logistics are aligned with how my company's overall sustainability things are achieved. The thing that I talked about, the top down versus bottom up earlier, was about telling your consumer that you are to be blamed for climate change, which I don't agree personally. I believe that consumer, 30 years back, there was no plastic in our homes. You know, we were not using any plastic bags. Actually, a couple of generations back, you will stitch the bag in your home and use
Mm.
that bag to go out and buy groceries. So that is because you brought in plastic, you must hold it. You reduce the price was so better, so much cheaper that it always makes sense. You buy a glass bottle versus a plastic bottle. Plastic bottle is always cheaper. So
Right.
you basically brought the consumerism top down, not bottom up. So when I'm looking at carbon footprint, I believe it is best to look from top down approach to tell an individual you do this, you do that. I I know it will also make a difference. I'm not saying that is not making a difference. If I am planting personally more trees than I would otherwise do, I know I'm contributing to it. But I do not see that the footprint conversation is, when you say footprint, what do you think, right? Foot, a human footprint is that's how it gets, built into an
I
individual.
see.
I don't want to see it that way. My belief is that there is a much easier solution to go about in climate change. Do it from the top down when it comes to these sort of things. You don't like plastics, ban them. As simple as that. Don't supply the inputs to a plastic maker. He won't manufacture. As simple as that. In India, for example, we banned firecrackers, right? Though they still happen sometimes, but overall, we don't allow firecrackers around major festivals or anything. That did lead to some job loss in some part of the country. But overall, that was a decision taken absolutely from top down. So you could either convince me or you that, hey, don't burn firecrackers, or you can simply make them go off the market and the problem is solved.
How did we go from, as you were saying, as an example, stitching our bags at home, to just not caring about, how our environment is being affected. It could also be dubbed the anti-climate economy, where we just stopped caring how our pollution is affecting the world. When did this transition occur in your mind, and how did we get here?
Hard to say, in a way that I don't know, I don't know what was my parents' mindset when they were stitching those bags. I don't
Right.
know what they were thinking. I think a lot of it has to do with, what is made available. So if you go to, if you go to market and I put 100 products in front of you, you have a choice. So I think the choices were much less earlier. Now, when you go to you know, 30 years back or 25 years back, how many malls were there, for example, in Delhi, from where I am, right, or Mumbai? Now you go around, there's a mall every other 2-3 kilometers, and there are multiple brands, hundreds of products. So I think it's a question of choice rather than anything else. And then there's price. So there are a lot of things that, if you see the things that really contribute a lot to whether it's plastic waste or purely, CO2 emissions, you see the worst quality, the cheapest products tend to be the more polluting ones. So, but when you're looking at countries like India and China, lower income, China is so though still far ahead of India, but if our per capita incomes are so low, that there will always be acceptance for the cheaper product. And I think that's what has led to it. I don't think individually Indian society, for example, I can talk about Indian society, but I think it may be true for almost every other society 100 years back. We used to basically recycle everything. There was a lot more recycling happening, a lot more reuse happening in our societies earlier than now. And also the fact that, and this I have seen a lot happening in US, you go to homes, you see there are refrigerators which are 25, 30 years old refrigerators working absolutely fine. But what you get today, they break down in 5 years, 6 years max, right? So the quality of products have gone down. So that there are a lot of other factors that have played into it. But yeah, I don't think we became anybody necessarily or fundamentally became anti-climate. It's just that, the way we transitioned from rural societies to urban, the way uh, things became available to us at such a low price, that the opportunity cost at the end of the day is a very, short-term decision that we often take,
Right.
right? The opportunity cost is often looking at your options in the immediate, sense of future, what I see today, rather than what I may see 10 years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
You are here, you are comparing, let's say, I want to stitch a bag at home, and where there is a plastic bag available at 50 paisa, or, just half a cent, and, gives you a lot of good, quality in terms of it has it, it can be reused and all that. And I think that's where it went about. But yeah, there's a lot of things that have changed. Earlier, we used to go and buy the milk,
Right.
and we would buy in a steel container, storage, jar. Now we get in plastic bag every day. So a lot of things just change how the production happens. So that's what I'm trying to say, that you can just reduce that by simply saying these methods of production or packaging are not allowed anymore. And that amount of pollution goes to zero immediately if you want. But I don't see that is going to happen. So we're going to keep building solutions like we are building and
Right.
making those things happen, on the private sector.
You spoke about our kind of recency bias, where we value the short term rather than, trying to plan for the long term. Do you see a similar pattern happening right now outside of climate change? Whether we're looking at artificial intelligence or genetic modification or nanotechnology, are we focusing too much on the short term in a particular area when we should be really planning for the long term?
I don't know. I know there are certain things that were done in last few years which sounded absurd. For example, the NFTs. But other than that, I think AIs and all these things are beyond my domain, my understanding personally. But uh, I think I remember in Interstellar, there is the movie. There is this, there's this dialogue where the person says, how did we became, from space, a generation that was exploring space, how did we become a caretaker generation? So
Hmm.
I don't think it's a black and white that you have to do only XYZ work and that everything else is waste. I don't think that is the way to look at it. um, there is definitely things that have to be done in terms of uh, how we do things right in terms of climate change. For example, Bitcoin, where people have very, extreme opinions, there is a significant push to make Bitcoin mining more sustainable and using, absolutely waste energy to do that. So again, that's what I said. Every industry will become a climate change industry. Every job will become a climate change job. Even within Bitcoin, you can do so much, or within, for example, coin mining, you can do so much to make it more sustainable. So I think there is a mix and match of a lot of gray areas. So I wouldn't say there are extreme opinions about, for example, Chat GPT coming
Mm,
up, becoming part of a lot of things very quickly in terms of getting embedded in Microsoft. So there's a lot that is happening, and I don't think we have to say, oh, all of this is waste. There will be people who will say the space exploration is one of the ways to address a future where this planet may become unlivable, and
right,
that may not happen just because of climate change. If we look
right.
at in the completely zone out and look at for the very bare small amount of time in which Earth has been livable, for example, human beings, you cannot say, for example, for sure that we don't need to really plan for a space exploration. So
Hmm.
I see all of that as a part of but you have to do multiple things. But I don't see any reason why AI or, for example, a lot of scientific research has saved you from a massive pandemic we faced
Yeah,
last 3 years.
yeah.
So I think it's everything has to work together. The only question I see is, can we do all of that more sustainably? So, for example, uh, Elon Musk is doing reusable rockets, right?
Right.
If you are using reusable rockets, it is cheap as well as more. I know fuel remains same, so fuel footprint has not gone down. But to make a rocket every time, you are also doing a carbon footprint, which is lesser in terms of if you're reusing it every time, right? So these are the things which you see people are trying to do, which nobody has thought about earlier, right? So all of that contributes to solving one problem or the other. The only thing I would say is, let's not do things that add to the problem. If
Right.
anything else, as long as that is happening, I don't see any reason why we should be dissing about, oh, this technology is bad or not. I think future will tell us more about whether AI is good or not. But
Yeah.
right now, yeah, a lot of people may be feeling unsafe because, oh, the AI can now code or do this or
Mm.
that. So a lot of those jobs may be feeling a bit insecure. But other than that, I don't have much views on whether particularly an individual technology is good or bad. I think let the future tell us about that.
You brought up two really good tangents, which I'd like to see if we can say something about. You brought up Bitcoin and ChatGPT. Do you have um, any opinions on Bitcoin? Do you see it as, a monetary revolution? Do you see it as just a fad?
Yeah, see, technically, a money has a definition, and I don't think Bitcoin fits into that definition yet. Uh, but that also it comes from a conventional system, right? The money has been defined through a definition that comes via state rather than individuals. But if you read through the definition of money, it actually started from getting away from barter system.
Yeah.
So that way Bitcoin can still be considered, anything can be considered currency rather. It's not just Bitcoin. Anything you can say can become a currency if if it fits into the definition of money. Uh, Personally, I don't know how will it really play out. There is a very good chance that it may not turn out to be what people are hoping it to be.
Mm.
All the altcoins and all that is anyways just riding the wave. But Bitcoin is still, it fits into a lot of good definitions of money. And the problem is that most of the criticism that we have of Bitcoin actually applies to a lot of currencies too. You know,
Mm.
so when we say that Bitcoin is volatile, so many currencies are volatile, and
Right.
so many currencies are devalued, going up and down significantly, compared to, let's say, USD. And then the fact remains that US dollar has become like that you can just press of a button, print any amount, and
Hmm.
it keeps funding, a global deficit in a way. So I don't know how long it's last, but I think people are gonna, as long as you keep seeing states using monetary policies as a weapon, you will see a lot of people, flying to Bitcoin. So when you see a Silicon Valley bank happening, you see Ukraine, Russia, US thing happening, a lot of people are going to say, maybe I need something like Bitcoin to keep me away from the ethos, the normal banking channels. So I think that's what Bitcoin is doing. But a lot of things have done that in past too. People have kept gold at home. Indians do
Yeah.
a lot. We believe the best store of value is land and gold. And that's why we invest a lot on it. So I think that storage function for us is gold more than rupee, because we faced 6 years back a demonetization where a lot of people suddenly realized even the money we had, in our homes was not the safest storage of value, because
Right.
government can any day confiscate it or just make it illegal tender. That is what you can't do with Bitcoin as such. So if you and I agree to trade in Bitcoin, it works. Uh, but yeah, whether it value stays or not, and whether who controls it becomes really a question. And one thing that I often wonder is that we know who is issuing the US dollar.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't know how Bitcoin is generated, who started it. But I think over a period of time, it will become irrelevant, because Bitcoin will get mined and each one of us will own whosoever is owning it will end up owning it. So it might so become an issue that it doesn't matter anymore. The overall number is fixed. So it might be able to do a lot of money functions, but right now I don't think so. In India, it's banned, for example. I can't, if I buy Bitcoin, the taxation on it is so horrible. I rather just not do anything, just keep money in my bank.
What do you think about ChatGPT? You spoke a little bit about certain job insecurities. Do you feel like ChatGPT, the hype is real? Do you feel like myself, for example, I can see through the BS of ChatGPT. We understand how large language models work. What do you think about ChatGPT and the future of artificial intelligence?
Well, I see, for example, I come from finance background. A lot of work can maybe, I wouldn't say ChatGPT, but I think the AI models
Yeah.
that are coming out might make a lot of things just redundant.
Mm,
Lot of jobs, skills that we learned, in ours when we were, were in schools and college. I think a lot of those skills might just become completely irrelevant. So
right.
yes, that's a fair risk to have, right? And but that is true for everything, and even when computers came in, a lot of skills became irrelevant. When in India, for example, in back in 70s and 80s, one of the easiest way to get a formal job was to know how to type, how to type using a typewriter.
Right.
Now you don't see any typewriter at all. Typewriter has become some sort of a luxury, showpiece that you have in there. Some people are having in their houses to see that, hey, I have this very unique thing in my home. But other than that, the whole technology went bust. So I think these transitions are going to happen. But yeah, the biggest risk I see with AI is far more, is the centralization of a lot more things. So we are seeing over a period of time, we see that in every space. We have seen that in banking, we have seen that in media, we have seen that in even in FMCG, that most of the brands are now owned by a very few conglomerates on the top. And I think with AI, I think you might see that happening a lot more, that a lot more things can just be done by tools that have been developed by a very few guys on the top, which leads further concentration of knowledge and wealth. But yeah, but those things have happened. It's a continuous evolution. It has happened, since we started industrial age, which also coincides with the climate change conversation, that both things parallel. But yeah, you cannot just make money from your, the strength of your arms anymore. But that has been true for last 100 years already, I think, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, I'm not personally, I know the skills that I learned, if
Yeah,
AI models continue developing this way, uh, those skills won't be required as such a lot more in future. But this is going to happen. So we need to, as an individual, as society, we need to just keep evolving ourselves too.
for sure. For sure. No, I totally agree. Well, we talked about India for a second. So I think we're starting to get like this cultural consensus that India is a wild card. Um, it's destined to be a leader in many aspects. And so when we're talking about climate change, do you feel like India is primed to be a leader in climate change solutions, climate technologies? Do you feel like there's a long way to go for India? What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think we're going to be leader in terms of technologies because we are not investing in it. So that's
Okay.
for sure. But I think the conversation on climate change uh, ideally should have been a borderless conversation, but unfortunately it isn't. So that we can't do much about that. But the truth is that if the whole of Europe, gets everything right, okay, meet all their targets, everything is done, well done, right? But if India doesn't, let's say, you still end up nowhere, right? You still
Mhm.
don't, mitigate anything as such because while our personal individual per capita carbon footprint is way too low, but as a country being almost 140, 140, 1400 million people, right? Uh, Too much, too many people to, even with a smaller personal carbon footprint, we create a huge amount of pollution overall. So I think if the climate change, this whole thing has to be done properly. India has to be one of the bigger role player, piece of the whole conversation. But in technology wise, I think the historically we have not been the innovators, we have been the executors. So
Mm.
what I see is that, for example, when it came to solar, we we invested more in execution rather than R&D, but
Mhm.
the execution investments have led to a significant result in terms of, say, energy transition, as well as the cost of solar has gone down unimaginably. I never expected that to happen, but it
Right.
did happen. So I think what we are going to see is R&D might continue to happen in the West, but a lot of deployment is going to happen in India. We have recently seen a lot more businesses coming about looking at carbon capture and storage or carbon capture or utilization as ways to mitigate their carbon footprint, which was the conversation not happening earlier, not happening
Right.
at least a year ago. In
Mhm.
last 5 6 months, I have seen a lot more conversation going into how those new age technologies can be now adopted. Uh, we're seeing that a lot of even in, for example, in textile space, very open at government level as well as industry level. They're open to really invest into scaling up those solutions. But the R&D is not going to be our piece as far as, with all out of disappointment, I'm saying that. I don't see that R&D is going to be our play, but we are going to be some big executors. And I'm really excited into what is going on in this space right now in India. A lot of changes have happened over the last few years. A lot of
Yep.
seriousness has come and a lot of good uh, even innovation level. They are good people. We are coming up. We have done a lot of work in India only. So it's not that things don't happen. But I think as a overall society are more focused on execution rather than, doing greenfield research as such.
Sure. We spoke earlier. So do you think that climate change will be solved through technology or through politics?
Uh, oh, See, a lot of things can be solved through politics anyway. So
Right.
a lot of things, not if not all. So you can, for example, ban certain things very easily. I'm not saying the transition of banning would be easy. I remember almost 25 years back, I was a kid, and in Delhi, the Delhi chief minister took a decision that we're going to ban use of diesel and petrol in some of the public transportation. We have the tuk-tuks, three-wheeler vehicles that are used by public a lot. And it was almost a 2 month strike happened. All the auto rickshaws, the tuk-tuks were off-road for 2 months, but the government didn't budge.
Mm-hmm.
Today you come to Delhi, there's no, every auto rickshaw, every tuk-tuk is a CNG vehicle. So government has a lot of power. Government is a very powerful instrument of change. Sometimes we undermine governments. We believe because of our own politics, we see government as a partisan thing. But as an institution, government is way too powerful.
Mm-hmm.
They can decide what happens next 10 years. So it matters, who's your public representative also matters that way. But um, but can they solve everything? The answer is no. So you
Mm.
will see a lot of things have to happen via new technology development, which won't happen in government. A lot of things going to happen via change in our habits. Now, something can be forced, but a lot of things shouldn't be. Not everything should be forced. Banning is again a very controversial thing.
Sure.
You can't ban everything, right? So banning also has this thing that only you might get into this belief that only government is the problem solver, which you don't want, and which is also not true. So
Right.
I see government doing its own bit, and the role involves a negative role, which is banning, and a positive role, which is facilitation of, executions as well as R&Ds. And private sector as individuals, we all have our roles too. For example, even if it is plastic, nobody is telling us that you have to throw away the plastic. You can reuse it, right? Government
Mhm.
doesn't have to come become a nanny. It doesn't have to be a nanny state where government comes and say, "Hey, Nikhil, don't throw away this plastic."
Right.
That you can do on your own too. So I think everybody has a role to play, and the good thing is what I'm seeing is a lot of these conversations, all the stakeholders are participating. We do not see a conversation which is only government doing or only private sector doing. We also get a lot of interest from governments as to how they can help us, and we are seeing the same thing happening from large corporates too. So I think right now the ecosystem is buzzing, and I hope it continues to be that way.
That's fantastic. So we've spoken about how governments are dealing with climate change. We've
Mm.
spoken about how your company is dealing with climate change. But the next question is, how does an individual make the biggest impact to solve climate change?
I think as an individual, I won't say the biggest. I think the thing is the expectation from my side would be that you just do your bit, and your
Yeah.
bit as an individual bits can accumulate to a larger sum. Uh, some of us maybe are more able in terms of skills to develop solutions, and solutions doesn't mean only technology. It could be financing solutions, it could be a policy solution. So some of us would be far more endowed in terms of skills to do bigger things, but I think it's about just being more aware about as an individual, so what you're doing, how you're doing things. Again, as I said, I don't like the marketing and PR towards carbon footprint, but that
Sure.
doesn't mean individually I have to be the most, irresponsible person.
Yeah.
Even if nobody is telling me, as an individual, I can still do my thing right, right? So I can do my personal bit. So I don't see the biggest contribution in terms of, oh, I want to solve it. Like I personally would develop solutions which will be 1 gigaton carbon removal. It doesn't have to be like that. Can
Right.
I do my bit in terms of reducing my personal things which I'm wasting on a day-to-day basis? It's also a great solution to do. Let's not buy things which I know are bad. Now, some of us may not have financial capacity to do that, but some of
Right.
us have the financial capacity to, choose between a sustainable versus non-sustainable, unsustainable solution. And I
Mhm.
think those are the choices we can make as an individual. But I don't want to go beyond that and put too much onus on a one person as an individual to make the changes. I think most of things have gone wrong at society level, and therefore a lot of changes should happen at a macro level rather than personally putting the burden on an individual.
When we were talking about ChatGPT, we touched on this notion of like not being prepared, not being educated,
Mm.
to handle this, I guess, transition from a labor-intensive economy to, an AI-driven economy. So is modern education helping or hindering youth from your perspective? And how do we innovate on our education system?
I think no, I'm out of education system, but I do see my nieces and nephews going to the schools, and
Right.
I think these kids are far more knowledgeable and far more sensitive to these things than we were. They are far more sensitive to climate change. But I've seen my, niece in class, first standard or second standard, writing an essay or making a poster on, air pollution, which we were not doing for
Right.
sure. So I think this generation, we underestimate, every generation has a tendency to, underplay or underestimate
Hmm.
the next generation. But I think these kids are going to be really far more sensitive to these issues than we were.
Right.
And yes, they are going to face the same challenge. See, when we started off, I got my first computer at home when I was 20, right? These kids have a mobile phone, an iPad, and a computer at the age of 3 or 4. So
Right.
yes, by the time they will turn 20, the sort of equipment that we are using will also go under a transition. So I think every generation will face those challenges of evolving against some generational changes that happen.
Hmm.
We used to feel, how did our parents shifted from a purely pen and paper to typewriter to a computer, and
Right.
we wonder how did we do that. I
Hmm.
think next generation will also wonder, But I think the next generation, the education system is, there are always things that we can improve, but I think these kids being are being educated in a good way. But yeah, there is always thing that you can always point out the gaps. But I see that these kids are not getting what they are not just being given, in IQ. They are being, trained towards EQ also, and I think that is very
Right.
important. But I think EQ part was simply missing out of our education when we, for example, I finished my schooling in 2004. I think EQ was not the part of conversation, but these kids do look at. I think emotional quotient is very much relevant in their learnings.
And I guess the last question for me, this is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. So, do you have any advice for Gen Z who are interested in building or contributing to climate tech?
I think don't get bogged down by those doomsday scenarios. I think that's one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I personally also have to struggle with. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that I have overcome that. The doomsday conversations about climate change, you can go back 5 years and there will be tweets that if we don't get things right by 2022, Earth will be unlivable. And all those things don't, yes, some of those things will happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think keep a positive approach towards this. We have done a lot in last few years, and I think a lot will happen. And your careers, your future will be built around sustainability for sure. So keep a positive outlook on it. Don't get bogged down with it, too much of negativity. And there is a lot more to do. Remember this. It's not that what we are building is done deal. A lot of things that we are developing as a startup ecosystem or as larger businesses will get deployed 10, 20 years down the line. So there
Mm-hmm.
is so much to do. So just look at where you can contribute in that, this massive change that's going to happen, rather than worry about whether I will become, whether AI will make my skills useless. I think you
Right.
are at a place where AI exists. So you can build around that rather than feeling, that, hey, maybe we are just not gonna, cut it, cut through the whole this and become efficient and effective. I think you will be effective if you keep learning new things and making sure that uh, Earth is not going down. It's only we as some living beings are going to face a struggle. So if
Yeah.
we do our things right, I think we will be able to leave a better future for the next generations. I think so. Just be positive about all that.
Well, Nikhil, this has been a fantastic
Mm.
conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Um,
Yeah.
do you have any links for the people to check you out?
I think check out at graviky.com or
Perfect.
airing.com. These are two our air-ing.com. These are websites. We are doing our bit, and I hope you like what we are doing. And
Absolutely.
but you check out a lot of other companies, very cool businesses around in climate tech space. Canvas the space, explore the whole space, and just know that there is a lot to do in future. Yep.
Perfect. Thanks for listening to the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. To support it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out our social links in the description, and give us a 5-star review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thanks once again to Nikhil from Graviky. His links can be found in the description as well. I like to end every podcast with this statement. The more we talk about what future we want, the more likely we are to build a future that we deserve.